I'm sure that if you've played Rise of Kingdoms, you've always looked at the top power leaderboard, looking at the strongest players in your KVK, and you've wondered, when could I reach such a high power level? But today I'm going to tell you, sometimes having crazy high power is not as good as it seems. So if you're interested in the advantages and disadvantages of high power, and you want to know if you should push your power to 70, 80, 90, even 100 million, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now, if we're going to find out if it's good or not to push power, I think the best way to do it is to look at the advantages of being a high power player compared to the advantages of being a low power player like myself. I will start off a high power player, I'd say is within the realm of 90 million or more, maybe even 80 million could count as a high power player, but I would say low power is below 60 million. 60 million and below is actually fairly low nowadays, especially in more competitive kingdoms. That being said, let's start off with the advantages of having high power, and the first one is really self-explanatory. If you have like 90 to 100 million power, you're going to have a lot more troops. I mean, you're going to have a ton of troops at your disposal between your infantry, your archers, and your cavalry, just because you've trained more to push your power. And this means a few things. I mean, it means you can definitely fill flags more, you can definitely get a lot more deads in your KVK, and it also means something quite important for your open field, and that is you have the ability to run a lot more marches. Someone with a high power can run like 5, maybe 6 marches, even at 100 million, because you have enough troops to not only fill those marches up, but let your hospital fill up a little bit more before you have to heal it. So it definitely does allow you in some ways to save some resources there, and also definitely allows you to just use more marches on the open field. The next thing that is very good with a high power player is they're much harder to zero. I mean, my account, you could just swarm it down, but a 100 million power player, they're going to need a rally, maybe a double rally to take out, depending on how strong their garrison is. So the higher your power, the harder you are to zero, and it just reaches a point really, like let's say the top people in this KVK between probably the top 2 people here, Shower King and this person, I don't know how to say their name, they're probably impossible to zero. I'd say even like past the top 20 or so, they're almost impossible to zero, just because their power is really too high. It's going to take so many rallies, and you'd have to fully surround their city with marches and like completely control the field to really do it. And someone like Shower King would take like triple rallies and stuff to even get down to a reasonable power level. So these players, almost impossible to zero, and that's definitely a good thing. I mean, you can pretty much do what you want in a KVK. You can teleport on territory you shouldn't be on, you can random port, stuff like that. Definitely gives you a lot more freedom when you have higher power, but that being said, it is just overall harder to zero someone that's above 60 million, because really once you reach 60 million, you're still within the swarm territory until you're within around 70 to 80 million power. The next advantage of being a high power player is that you're just going to be probably more valuable to your kingdom, especially if you are a one alliance kingdom, and that is because players with high power in a one alliance kingdom, well, you're just going to have more troops to kill, you're going to have more commanders on the open field, and you're probably going to have a few more resources available. So those players are just overall more valuable to a kingdom, especially if they are active and fighting. And I think that's just really self-explanatory, because they can fill more flags, they can get more kills, they can run more marches, and all that is just an advantage of being a high power player. Also, high power players can perform better in Ark of Osiris, because you just have more troops once again, and you can run more marches. So it allows you to do better in Ark, especially since it's a game mode where really once your troops go down, they're probably just consider them as deads. Even though you can heal them, no one really does. So you'll notice that a high power player in Rise of Kingdoms will just do really good in Ark of Osiris, because they can just swamp the whole map. So you'll notice any real leading Ark teams, they're going to have players with crazy high power, and they're just going to be overall very, very strong. I mean, this is a 3 billion power Ark team, and in comparison with 30 members is only 5 billion. So theirs is definitely a very strong Ark team with probably some crazy high power whales, just because of how strong these kingdoms are. And you'll notice the whales that are just high power are going to perform really well. I could guarantee some of these MVPs, they're probably up there in the realms of 200-300 million power, and if they're not, they're at least above 100 million. Pretty much every single person here would be. So you'll notice, yep, just when you look at Ark of Osiris, having high power is just always an advantage. The final main advantage I would say with high power is you have the ability to win more events for a few reasons. First of all, with Mightiest Governor, you can train more troops. I mean, that's also pretty self-explanatory. A lot of these are really easy to understand, because if you have high power, you can train more, you can get more troops, you can push more points. Also, if you have high power, you're running more marches, you can get more kills in the kill event in your KVK. So things like that allow you to win more events. And if you're pushing high power, stuff like Lord of War, all these events are really winnable. I mean, I'm sure that its guts is somewhere in the realm of like 70 to 90 million power to be currently at rank 1. And if anything, one of the bigger whales in the kingdom will probably end up pushing up eventually and just snagging that position just because they've got more power and they're willing to train those troops. So those events are much easier to win if you're willing to push that power. So now that we've spoken about all the good things to do with high power, what about some of the disadvantages? And the first one is really annoying for a lot of big players, and that is that you have a lot more expectations. You can't just really push to 100 million power in a kingdom and expect to not be taxed heavily for it. I call it tax, but really you expect it to perform with it. Because if you're pushing high power, you need to get more kills, you need to fight more people, and you need to kill more troops, just get more deads. All that stuff is all things you need to do as a high power player. And you'll notice that can be really time consuming fighting that much in KVK. Like, I think my requirements are 15 million kills and like 1.2 million deads. That's really easy. That's just a guess. I don't know exactly, but I'm sure someone with 100 million power, which is almost double what I'm rocking right now, they're going to have requirements of like 2 to 3 million, maybe even 4 million deads. They're going to be looking at 30 million kills, stuff like that. Is what you're looking at when you're looking at a 100 million power player. And the thing that this really becomes a disadvantage with is, yes, it could be pretty easy to do that with just 5 extra marches compared to someone like me who only runs like 3 marches. But the thing is, you don't get access to those top quality, top-notch commanders any extra than a player who's 60 million power. I mean, I have got most of the best archer commanders in the game, and if you gave me a 100 million power player, let's say this person has all the same archer commanders as me, my archer commanders, they're going to get the same kills, just it's going to take longer to reach the kills that they're required to get because they have to fight more. I mean, that's just really easy to understand. Basically, they're putting in a lot more effort than they'll be getting out of it. So that's definitely a disadvantage, just being expected to perform more. The next disadvantage, and this is another big one, is it's almost impossible to migrate out of a kingdom, especially when you're in a really high power level. I mean, if I wanted to migrate right now, which I don't, but let's say I did, it would take ridiculous amounts of passports to just even leave at 59 million power, just let alone imagine thinking about a high power player. I'm about 30 passports now. I think when you're 100 million, you're like 80 passports. So it's crazy expensive to migrate out of a kingdom. And once you reach 150 million and above, it is one of the most ridiculous costs in the game. It will take months of saving up to even be able to leave, or it's going to take thousands of dollars. So definitely annoying to leave a kingdom, and if your kingdom goes into civil war, you're pretty much stuck there until you can either drop your power, which means you lose all your stuff, or until you can get the passports, which will take a ton of time, and some kingdoms just won't even supply that number of passports because the accounts are just that expensive to get out of their kingdoms. The final disadvantage with a bigger account is the fact that they're way harder to upkeep in a big kingdom, especially a competitive one that has high expectations. So if you're a high power account and you need to get a ton of kills, you're going to need to spend a lot more resources. You're going to need to spend a lot more speed ups to train the troops, kill the troops, fight other people's troops. Stuff like that is going to take a lot of resources in general. And once your KVK finishes, yes, you're going to get troops back, but you're going to have to train back way more troops than someone who's rocking a smaller account. Like, I maybe train back 500,000 between off seasons. A big player is going to train like 2 million, 3 million troops, which is way more than what I'm doing. Maybe not 2 million, maybe like 1 million to 1.5 million. So it's definitely more expensive to upkeep a larger account, which is expected because it is higher power, it's got more troops, and therefore is going to need more resources to meet those heavier expectations. Now, what about a lower power player? What are the advantages there? And I think the first one is very similar to a disadvantage of the big accounts, is that a small account like mine has much lower expectations in a KVK, and because I'm able to use the same commanders with the same equipment, with the same amount of troops in the same march, in theory, obviously, if we're talking about just the same player here, just with more power or less power, I'm able to get the same amount of kills at the same amount of speed as someone who is a higher power account. The only difference being is if they run more marches, they can maybe get kills quicker than me, and this is once again assuming that these players spend the same amount of money and they've got the same commanders with maybe an extra march or two on the high power account. So when you're a low power player, you are able to get the same amount of kills as a high power player, which means you can usually reach your KVK requirements quicker with less resources. Also, one thing on top of that is that you don't have to kill as many troops, which once again reduces your resource costs. this comes into the next advantage. A small account like mine is really cheap to maintain. I mean, I don't spend many resources or speed ups in the off season. I really only spend whatever training speed ups I have, and I still have a ton left over. And this is a lot for me. I might go through all of these in one season total. So a big power account, this is like 5 minutes worth of speed ups, and this is like 5 months worth of speed ups for me for training, since I just don't train that many troops. So bigger accounts, way harder to maintain, but these smaller accounts like mine, much easier to maintain, much cheaper to do, and they require a lot less effort, because you don't have to constantly be trying to maintain these accounts and make them almost as strong as you can, because really you just need enough troops to run 3 or so marches and get about 1 million deads each KVK, which is really reasonable. The next advantage to a smaller account like mine is the fact that you're way more resource efficient. You don't have to use nearly as many resources for the same amount of kills, and this comes down to the fact that there are only so many very strong meta-breaking commanders in the game. Let's say every single time there's a cycle of commanders coming around, there's only 6 meta commanders, 2 cavs, 2 infantry, 2 archers. For example, Zulang and Herman, Nevsky and Joan, and then Scipio and Lao Che, and the rest of the commanders, while they are good, they are slightly weaker than these meta-breaking commanders. But if you're a smaller power account, you can use all these meta OP commanders and you'd be perfectly fine with just those. You never really have to expand. But if you're 100 million power, 200 million power, even 90 million power, your requirements are much higher. You need more marches to reach them within a reasonable time. So that means you're going to have to use more resources on the extra march or the extra 2 marches, which may not be as efficient or as strong as your meta marches, but smaller accounts, you can run those extremely meta commander pairings, and that means you're just using way less resources and you're getting overall usually better trades on the open field. And once again, we're assuming here that we're not looking at a whale and a free-to-play, we're just looking at 2 different levels of power on 2 different accounts. The last real advantage, and this is an easy one to understand, is small accounts are just easier to migrate. I mean, higher accounts are hard to migrate. Small accounts, you can get them pretty much out of anywhere in a couple of seconds. So it's super easy to migrate a smaller account like mine, and I may only have to save up passports for a month or 2 months, or I could even just max buy a single bundle to get like 30 passports. Yes, that's going to cost money, but it is definitely easier to migrate an account like mine than it would be to migrate any of these accounts that are, for example, surrounding my city right now. So most of the time, small accounts, you're going to have a much easier time migrating outside of a kingdom. Now, what about the disadvantages to a small account? And the first one, and this is probably the biggest one, is you can run out of troops really quickly. You don't have nearly as many troops as someone who's 100 million power, because they're going to have so many more to their name. I mean, I think I have a total right now of 1.2, I have 2 million units. I mean, that's more than I thought. I have around 2 million units, and that's mainly archers. 1.2 million of them are archers. And if I make any real big mistake this KVK, like if I accidentally hit a pass or I accidentally swarm a flag, then I'm taking a way bigger percentage of my troops as deads. For example, I stood within a flag AoE, and I accidentally took like 50,000 archer deads that I didn't need or didn't want. And that's something that's definitely going to impact me a lot more than a player with higher power, because I have way less troops to my name. And that means if you do a mistake like I've done before, where I swarmed a pass because I was very tired, then I just took a ton of deads and I literally had to remove one of my marches because I didn't have enough troops to run that march. So if you're a low power player, mistakes like that can literally knock a full march out of the game and can almost ruin your KVK experience. So that's definitely something that low power players should consider. And as KVK goes on, you're going to have way less troops to do stuff like fill flags and fill rallies as well, because they're all going to pretty much be dead. The next disadvantage of low power is it can be very difficult to get into a kingdom main alliance, and that's mainly for kingdoms which are much bigger and run like 2 or 3 alliances, where the main alliance is still the one getting most of the rewards because it is the one with all the whales in it and the people who are spending money. But if you're a low power player, you might not even be allowed into these main alliances where most of the big events are taking place because you just don't have enough power. Some kingdoms will give exceptions to high kill accounts, or some kingdoms like mine are just one alliance. As you can see, we're a singular alliance and everyone's inside of this one alliance. But some other kingdoms like 2365, when I was in there, the whole kingdom is split between 3 main alliances, and you really were chosen by your power, or if you had a really, really high amount of kills, and that's how you got into the main alliances. So if you don't have high power, it can be very difficult to get in the top alliance, and in the very early game, this can be like absolutely horrendous. Obviously, we're talking more about endgame stuff here, but that's something we should still consider. The next thing with a low power account is the fact that they're really easy to zero. I mean, any account that's a lower power like mine, you could just swarm it out. I mean, my account could be swarmed out in around 2 minutes, and I would have all my troops dead, all my resources gone, and it would just be completely over for me. With a bigger account, it would take at least 20-30 minutes to rally it down before it's within the swarm territory. But if I went off territory for 1 second, I get imprisoned, bang, it's just over. I can get swarmed out, it's done. I can't do things like random port in enemy zones. I could never teleport on off alliance territory unless I had an instant way to get back in the main alliance, because I could just get destroyed within a matter of seconds. Obviously, there are ways to get around this. I spoke about them in my rogue video where you can hide troops and flags and stuff and then teleport away, but that is still a little bit risky and you could be zeroed, especially if you're offline and a flag falls. By the time you get online, even if you were instant to react, you would pretty much be down at least 100,000 to 500,000 units from just the one swarm that hit your city. So it's definitely very difficult as a low power player to get out of those zeroing situations where you could be losing tons of troops. Yes, there are also ways to counter being zeroed. I've made a video on that as well, like spam healing your hospital, and that still works as a low power player, but it is still going to be very expensive, and eventually they're going to break through if you can't find a way to teleport out. The final real main disadvantage of a small account is the fact that it's much more difficult to play in an Ark of Osiris team, especially a more competitive one. For example, right now my account's only 60 million power. I play in one of these side teams for our kingdom. I do like that team, it's very fun, but I couldn't do something like Osiris League. My power is just way too low and it's just not an option for me. So I'm missing out on quite a few gold heads there because of my power mainly. Also, I can't really join because I don't have the right time zone. But that being said, most people with low power just are not going to be inside of things such as Osiris League and are nowhere near as strong in an event like Ark of Osiris, where it's all about being as strong as possible and having as many troops to just dump into your enemies. Of course, there's some strategy, but really the troops are what win those events. So being a low power player, you're much less valuable in Ark. You're going to get way less points, and you're going to run out of troops very, very fast, especially if you're towards the end of your KVK, where you're down around pretty much all of your units. So definitely very difficult to play Ark of Osiris in a competitive level as a low power account. Now, with that being said, what do I think is better? Should he be a high power player or should he be a low power player? And in my opinion, it's kind of up to personal preference, and I'll tell you who should be which. If you are more active or you spend more money or you want to be able to do other events a little bit more proactively and you're willing to use the extra resources and extra speed ups and your kingdom's demands aren't too high, you could be able to be a high power player. Mainly it's going to be spenders who will go for 100 million, 200 million power because it's more within reason to maintain that. But even if you're a free-to-play or a low spender, 100 million power is reasonable. I could actually get that if I gave up on fighting for a KVK or two. And if your kingdom doesn't really care about your kills, then you could do this. Would I recommend pushing 100 million power as a free-to-play? Not really. The costs are too high. You're going to pretty much ruin your account because your kill points will absolutely suck compared to your power usually. And it's just not going to be a very fun experience, especially in a competitive kingdom as a free-to-play low spender. Of course, whales can do this and get away with it perfectly fine, and most whales will, just because the advantages I mentioned before are worth it because the resources and the speed-ups are not really a very big concern, and they've got crazy equipment to make up for the slightly weaker commanders they will have on a 5th or a 6th march. So that being said, really high power is for whales. I'm sure most people would have guessed that. But low power is really good for a free-to-play or a lower spender, or even someone who just doesn't have as much time for the game. So even if you're a whale and you don't have much time for the game and you're willing to spend more money towards things like equipment and towards things like commanders, then you could actually consider being a low power player like my account and also running some very strong commanders and just being ridiculously annoying on the open field, or having something like max crystal tech. So things like that are possible at a low power account, but I really think most whales will hover around the 100 million to 90 million power range. But even then, you could have an account like mine where someone does whale out on it, and if I ever did start whaling in Rise of Kingdoms for whatever reason, I'd probably stick around this power range and just get crazy stacked crystal tech and crazy stacked commanders, instead of basically spending all my money on training troops or pushing events that I don't care that much about. So there's still a possibility for players who don't have as much time to be a low power account like mine and get a ton of success out of it and even get more kills than something like a whale account like the one next to me. So definitely possible, definitely something that's reasonable, but really the moral of it comes down to most whales will be high power and most free-to-play low spenders are recommended to be a lower power account. Now, if you enjoyed today's video and you want to see a low power account like mine actually doing endgame Ark of Osiris, come on down to my stream tomorrow at 4 UTC. I'll be doing Ark of Osiris live for about an hour or so, and you guys can watch me get absolutely demolished or get a ton of rewards with my Archer commanders. So if you want to see me running my 3 March Archer Murder Ball live on stream at around 60 million power, trust me, come on down, it'll be very fun, and we can also take a quick look at kind of the changes they added to Ark with all the team stuff and all the management that they've added to the newest update. So if you're interested in Ark and how all the new stuff works, I highly recommend coming on down to the stream. It's going to be really fun, and the link will be in the pinned comment and also in the description. Now, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.